Liskarm is a 5-star operator formerly from Blacksteel Worldwide, who now works as a defender at Rhodes Island. This video will aim to be a comprehensive guide to help you get a better idea of how she functions as a unit. To start with, this video will cover quite a few topics in a decent amount of detail, and long content isn't for everyone, so I'll include timestamps in the description so you can skip to the bits you're interested in, as well as a short summary at the end of the video, also timestamped in the description. To start us off, general strengths and weaknesses. Liskarm is a defender unit, and as the title might imply, she specializes in defense, being able to block 3 enemies at once, and having a considerable HP pool. She has very well-rounded base stats, can attack from a range, and offers a lot of support to most teams, being able to choose between a defensive and offensive skill, as well as making other operators on the field stronger. Her main downsides are that her offensive skill gives her a short self-stun right after use, her defensive skill is automatic and might be timed weirdly, she is not quite as tanky as some of the other defenders, and that getting proper use out of her support will limit your positioning. Each of these points will be talked about in more detail over the course of the video. First things first, I'll give her a quick comparison to other defenders, or rather, a quick summary of why she can't be compared to other defenders. In terms of raw stats, Liskarm is very well balanced, and all around just a great unit. The only other 5-star defenders who can compete with her in tankiness are Croissant and Vulcan, but what she lacks in HP she more than makes up for in DPS. But there's a problem. Raw stats don't really work for defenders. For example, Croissant has very high defensive stats, but it doesn't matter because she can't kill enemies outside of a few pits, and a dead enemy doesn't do any damage. Then all of the defenders have their own skills and passives, which give them extra survivability. If you take into account just dodge chances, the ranking would look like this. A lot of the 5-star defenders have even more survivability from their skills, not even only defensively. Blitz has a massive 6-second stun to all units in front of him that combines with an enormous attack speed buff that can mow down an entire wave of enemies if used correctly. Or it can go unused because the enemies are immune to stun or weak enough that it doesn't matter. You can't even rely on stats and passives for HP because Vulcan has one of the highest HPs in the entire game. And then you remember that healers exist, which lets even Nerl be tankier than her in almost every situation. This is part of what makes Liskarm's utility so valuable. Even before getting into her skills, Liskarm has a longer range than most other defenders, meaning she can get in a few pot shots on approaching enemies, and can even take part in the fight if they're being blocked by someone else. Her damage isn't incredible, but because she can also fight from a range, there are plenty of situations where the other 5-star defenders would all be doing no damage. Blitz is tankier, has a more reliable stun, and does better burst damage, but he's a call-out unit who won't be coming back and does lower overall DPS. Asbestos does higher sustained damage, hits more targets, and doesn't stun herself, but outside of tanking mages is squishier than even some of her 3-star counterparts. But the main reason Liskarm is so good is the same reason it's hard to compare her to any other unit in the game. Her talent, tactical defense. Before getting into her skills and talents, here's a very quick rundown on how skills in Arknights work. Skill points, or SP, is how most operators in Arknights use their skill. It's a little blue gauge under the unit's health bar. Some operators start with some SP when they're first deployed to make it easier to use their skills. Some can store multiple charges. But the important thing to know is that when the blue bar fills up, an icon will appear above your operator's head to let you know their skill's ready to use. Despite the bar being the same size on all operators, every skill requires a different amount of SP to be used. SP can usually be gained 3 ways, depending on the operator. Some operators gain SP automatically, others gain SP when attacking, and some only gain SP when being attacked. So, for example, Mestima, a caster, gains skill points automatically, but needs 56 SP to use her second skill, meaning it'll take 56 seconds for her to be ready again. It lasts for 6 seconds. This is her low cooldown skill. Chen, a guard, gains skill points whenever she attacks, and needs 25 SP to activate her second skill, meaning she needs to attack 25 times for her skill to be charged. And Liskarm, a defender, gains skill points whenever enemies attack her, needing to be hit 20 times to activate her first skill. Every operator has different combinations of skill point gains, and which type each skill needs can be seen in their in-game profile when looking at their skills. Not all guards are on hit, not all defenders are on being hit, and not all casters are automatic. That being said, there are other ways operators can gain skill points. Liskarm's first talent, Tactical Defense, restores 1 skill point to herself and a random adjacent ally every time she's hit, in addition to the normal SP she gains for herself, meaning every time she gets hit she generates 2 skill points for herself and 1 to an adjacent ally. It might not sound like much, but it offers a lot of utility to your entire team. by giving any other operator their skill a lot more often, especially when you get into some of the higher attack speed enemies. Usually, you'd use this to buff a ranged attacker with a long cooldown on their skills, for instance the AoE caster Masteries, who is one of the worst skill up times in the entire game, or Saria, a defender who specializes in healing. But you can also use it to help permanent buffs like Thorns' third skill get activated faster, to help your vanguards generate deployment points so you can get more operators onto the field, or just to keep your healer's skills up more often if you're taking a lot of damage. It doesn't matter what kind of SP generation the unit has, every time Liskarm gets hit, she gives out a skill point. One thing to keep in mind is that a talent can restore skill points to someone who's already maxed out with their SP. So if you use her next to a unit with a permanent buff like Thorns, chances are you won't get a lot of use out of her passive once he's going. Usually, stick Liskarm next to a DPS unit who has a long cooldown, or a skill you want to spam, like Silver Ash or Exia. You could also put her in the middle of multiple units, but the SP is randomly distributed between anyone she's next to. Her second talent, Thunder Resistance, is much more simple, just giving her a bit of res, which reduces the enemy arts damage by a fixed %. Next up, her skill 1, her bread and butter, Charged Defense. There isn't all that much to say about Liskarm's first skill, and I mean that in a good way. She's a tank and it makes her tankier, boasting an 80% defense increase for 8 seconds, as well as a single instance of damage nullification for the first attack after it procs. The skill is activated automatically, which occasionally might lead to awkward timings where it expires right before an enemy reaches her, or activates right before the last enemy she's fighting dies. But given its crazy low SP cost, it doesn't matter nearly as much as it would for other units, especially in stages with lots of ranged units. 20 SP is a hefty cost for most units, especially when they only gain SP when being hit. But given Liskarm gains twice as much SP because of her passive, the only times it being down might be a problem is against enemies that hit slow and hard. If you're ever unsure which skill to run on Liskarm, run Charged Defense. Even against enemies with lots of magic damage, it's a set and forget buff, and the damage immunity can help out with any damage type. With this skill, instead of having to worry about manual activation or downtime, you can focus on using her passive to the fullest potential. Liskarm's skill 2, Counter Arc, gives a respectable multi-target burst damage at the cost of a brief stun when the skill is over. At first this might seem like a major drawback, and it can be, but with a few positioning tricks you can use her S2 on almost any map. All you need is some kind of slow or stun, or even just another unit behind her, to hold the lane for the few seconds it takes her to get back up. 5 seconds might seem like a long time, but for most enemies, it's only a tile or two in movement. Meaning if enemy spawns are staggered, they usually won't even reach her before she's back up again, since she has 3 tiles of range. One combination I personally like to run is Liskarm and Mestima with their second skills. Liskarm's damage combined with Mestima's area of effect attacks work wonders at killing lots of enemies very quickly. Mestima has a 6-second stun that covers all of Liskarm's downtime, and Liskarm's tactical defense makes up for Mestima's absolutely atrocious skill point costs. The main issue holding Liskarm's second skill back is that while it does good damage, at the end of the day she's a defender and utility unit. Her attacks deal very low damage, even with the massive self-buff her second skill gives her, which means a lot of the time the extra effort to cover her stun isn't worth it, especially since it means Liskarm has no defensive skills to keep herself alive. Also, while she's stunned, Liskarm usually won't be getting hit, meaning she and her ally won't be getting their skills back up. But she can definitely add a good chunk of arts DPS if you need it, just make sure that if she's your last line of defense, you don't activate it too early. Liskarm's main strength lies in her utility passive, Tactical Defense, which she unlocks as early as Elite 1, Level 1. However, she needs to get hit to put it into use, meaning any extra levels you can throw at her will let Liskarm survive longer and give more SP. Don't level her over your main DPS units, and don't rely on her skill 2 to be your main DPS, but Liskarm would certainly be worth leveling and, eventually, promoting. That being said, her promotion isn't high priority, as all it gives her is stats, including res that, due to her relatively low HP pool, isn't as beneficial as you might expect. In an ideal situation, the best way to tank through arts damage is with good healers, or by killing the source very quickly. At the end of the day, Liskarm's second talent will maybe let her live through 1 or 2 extra blows, but you'll get a lot more benefit from the raw stats she gets from levels in most situations. Her base skill gets a slight bump at Elite 2, making her generate a few more drones a bit faster. Nice to have, but not worth promoting to E2 just for the drones if you don't plan on using her. As with all units you're using, you want her at skill level 7 when you can, but if you're short on materials, leaving her at skill level 4 is fine, being a 60% defense buff compared to an 80% defense buff, and needing 1 more hit to charge. If you're planning on using her second skill, getting her to skill level 7 is a bit more important, since it gives her a 5% higher chance to stun and some much needed extra attack. Liskarm's skills have fixed durations that aren't affected by skill level. Liskarm's skills are both mediocre, or good but not excellent. Mastering charged defense gives her a decent chunk of defense, but only reduces the SP cost by the equivalent of 1 attack at maximum mastery. So it's just a very expensive, not always active way of leveling up her defense specifically. As for her second skill, Liskarm gets a whole lot more attack, a higher chance to stun enemies, can attack another target, and saves 2 hits per recharge. But there aren't many situations where Liskarm will be using her counter arc as soon as it's back off cooldown. 25% chance to stun is still fairly low, and while the attack buff and extra target let her do DPS better, the situations where you're using Liskarm's second skill usually won't be a situation where that damage will matter. Despite how large the percentage attack buff is, Liskarm's attack value is very low even at max level. There's also the opportunity cost to consider, given that getting her skill 2 to Mastery 3 costs more materials than promoting another unit to E2. My recommendation would be that mastering her first skill isn't worth it, and that if you're going to master her second skill, raise it to M3, but treat it as a very low priority, even if you always run counter arc on her, since M1 and M2 give almost nothing, and M3 is very expensive. While stats are always nice on Liskarm, and her masteries do give her stats, her main use comes from her first passive, so sinking days worth of sanity and materials to give her a very minor buff isn't worth it until you have a lot of other units ready to use, at which point there's a good chance the buff won't make a difference. In summary, Liskarm is worth raising because she's a solid defender who offers more support than any other unit in the game, all the while being able to take a beating to keep your DPS units safe and chipping in with damage from afar. She can do most of her job from Elite 1 skill level 4, her second promotion is low priority. Giving her more stats from levels and skill levels is great since it lets her get hit more, which lets her do her job better. Don't worry about masteries since they're very expensive and don't give her much. Use her first skill, and put her next to a unit whose skill you want to spam. Is she worth pulling for? Yes. Liskarm is one of the best 5-star units in the game, and no one else can do her job. Next time she's on a banner, it might be worth doing a 10 pull or 2, but don't go broke using all your resources for her. She'll show up eventually when you're pulling for a 6-star. Is she worth buying from the yellow certificate store? Sort of. If you're going to use your yellow certs on a 5-star, Liskarm is one of the best options. But you're better off saving up to buy a 6-star in most cases. Blemishine, Hoshiguma, Mudrock, and Saria are all a lot more general use than Liskarm, and are fantastic units in their own right. Plus, if you don't have DPS units like Silverash, Exia, or Surta, they'll usually offer a lot more to your team than Liskarm. But it's a matter of personal priorities, and when she next shows up in the yellow cert store, she's certainly worth at least considering. Thank you for watching! If there's anything you disagreed with, thought I missed, or even if you just enjoyed the video and would like to see more like it, please let me know down below. Hopefully you found this video helpful, entertaining, or a combination of the two. That's all for now, folks.